The Rape of Nanking, Group 2 for History 112. Introduction. The Rape of Nanking was a period of time between December 13, 1937 until January of 1938. The Japanese army invaded the capital of China, which at the time was Nanking. While in the city, the Japanese soldiers tortured and raped many citizens in the city, killing upwards of 300,000 people. What happened before December 13, 1937? The Japanese army began their warpath in Shanghai in the summer of 1937. While the Japanese thought the Chinese would be easily overcome, they were greatly surprised when the Chinese gave massive resistance. This caused the fighting at Shanghai to last into the fall. Once the Japanese army had taken over Shanghai, they turned their focus to the capital of China, Nanking. With the Japanese army retreating the Chinese back into the city, the Chinese leader, Chiang Kai-shek, ordered all military units to leave the city. This would only leave civilians and untrained military left to defend the city. Battle at Shanghai, 1937. Both images below are from the Battle of Shanghai, which took place in the summer of 1937 that lasted until fall of 1937. In the first picture, you can see there's a Chinese soldier wearing a gas mask. In World War II, gas warfare was used as a weapon. And in the second photo, you can see a Chinese soldier using trenches. Again, in World War II, trench warfare was used as a means to getting around during the battlefield, as well as a means to hide yourself from your enemy. December 13th, 1937. The first Japanese soldiers arrived in the city of Nanking. The citizens of Nanking heard horror stories of the destruction the Japanese soldiers had done to other cities along the path to arrive at Nanking. Things that the Japanese did in other cities were burn the cities down, loot the city, and destroy private property of the citizens. Once arrived, the Japanese soldiers were given orders to kill all captives. This order was given by the general in charge. This gave the Japanese soldiers the ability to kill any and all citizens who lived in the city at their own discretion. The Japanese targeted the remaining Chinese troops that were still in the city. These troops were often slaughtered in torturous ways, such as being used for bayonet practice or buried alive. The Chinese troops that were left in the city were often untrained with little to no knowledge of military practice. Arrival at Nanking. General Iwan Matsu at the Victory Parade is the first picture you see. You can see he's riding his horse, and the Japanese troops are behind him. In the second picture, you can see soldiers marching during the parade. Also in the middle of the parade, you can see men riding horses, along with hundreds of Japanese troops as they arrived into the city. What happened to the women of Nanking? While the men of Nanking suffered greatly, the women of Nanking suffered even worse. When the Japanese arrived, they immediately began to rape and torture the women, girls, and elderly. They would often be subjected to gang rape and then killed by the Japanese. No woman or child was spared during this horrific time. It is often said that there were upwards of 200,000 rapings that took place during this time. As another form of torture, the Japanese would often make the sons rape their mothers and fathers rape their daughters, as well as siblings do sexual acts to each other. These brutal acts went on for the entire 6 weeks the Japanese were in Nanking. Nanking citizens. Both images below, you can see the citizens of Nanking in different forms. The first picture is a Japanese soldier standing with corpses. In the image, you see a Japanese soldier standing to your right. Below him, you can see hundreds of Chinese corpses, and there's also an image of a boat next to a river. These people were often left laying in the street after they were beaten and tortured. The second picture is Japanese soldiers leading citizens out of town. Often when this happened, these citizens were led into fields and were often buried alive, tortured, shot, used as bayonet practice, or worse. Real life account. Ma Jingyu was a citizen of Nanking and 11 years old during the time of the massacre and remembers it very clearly. She remembers her cousin, who was 7 months pregnant at the time of this event, was raped and then later killed. Ma Jingyu dressed up as a boy to avoid getting raped, but says she still was harassed by Japanese soldiers, slapping her 70 times and ultimately causing her to bleed. This account shows how ruthless and ugly the Japanese soldiers were to the Chinese. It also shows how desperate the Chinese men and women were, and to the extent they would go in order to be protected. Torture by the Japanese. The images below show the brutality and the inhumane ways the Japanese treated the citizens of Nanking. The first image you see is an image of a Chinese boy who had a blindfold on, hands tied behind his back, and tied to a tree. You can also see that there was a Japanese soldier holding a sword or bayonet up high, looking to decapitate the boy. The second picture, you can see there are 3 Japanese soldiers and 1 Chinese man with hands tied behind his back on his knees, and the Japanese soldiers are using him as bayonet practice. John Rabe and the Safety Zone. John Rabe was a German businessman who was living in Nanking during the Japanese invasion into the city. He, along with many other Westerners living in the area, felt that they needed to protect the citizens of Nanking. As a group, they attempted to reason with the Japanese. They were able to reason because John Rabe was a member of the Nazi Party, which was a member of the Axis powers, which the Japanese were members of. This gave many citizens of Nanking the chance to escape. John Rabe and many others created the Nanking Safety Zone, which was able to house and protect about 200,000 Chinese citizens from most certain death. The Safety Zone was located in the western part of the city. Safety Zone. The images below are the location of the Safety Zone, and the members who created it. The image to the left, you can see the outline of the Safety Zone that was in the city of Nanking. To the image to the right, you can see there's 5 men. The man in the middle is John Rabe, and the 4 men around him are the men who helped create the Safety Zone. Why did this genocide occur? During World War II, Japan and China were on opposite sides of the fighting, with China on the Allied side and Japan on the Axis power side. Because of their differing sides, naturally each country went to war with each other. With tensions rising, Japan took the opportunity to invade China and capture their capital. While Japan thought the battle would only last a few days in Shanghai, the Chinese put up a massive resistance and extended the fighting for months. This greatly upset the Japanese, and therefore they wanted revenge. With Nanking being the capital, that was their best way to get revenge. Why did this genocide occur? Continue. With the leader of China ordering troops to leave the city in order to keep them safe for the remainder of the war, the city of Nanking was left open and unarmed. Once the Japanese realized the city was open to attack, they did just that. They knew if they destroyed the city and killed the Chinese, they would send a statement to not only China, but the other allies that the Japanese were there to stay. Following these events, the Japanese would bomb Pearl Harbor as a retaliation. Conclusion. Due to the cruel nature of the Japanese soldiers, Chinese citizens suffered a great deal, and it is an event in their history that they will never forget. The pictures below are a statue that is found at the Nanking Massacre Memorial. The first image that you see is a famous image. It's the image of a little boy, and in the picture he looks at wreckage from the city. And in the second picture you can see the citizens of Nanking running away, often falling. This represents the torture the Japanese put upon these citizens and their acts to get away. Websites of pictures. Below you can find the websites in which we obtained the pictures to use for this slideshow. This is a continuation of the first page, the websites of pictures. Below you can find the pictures, the websites we used to obtain the pictures. This is our works cited page. This is the information where we received most of our information and where we got our citations.